everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review, and this is our twice-weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week or today, not this week, because it's twice a week, we are back with more of the Brothers War main stories with Episode 3, Sword 1, by Miguel Lopez. My quick review at the top of this one is I am truly mixed on this one. Like, kind of heavily mixed on this one.
Oh.
There were parts of this where I was thoroughly bored, and there were parts of this that I thoroughly enjoyed. And in the grand scheme of things, you don't need to have read this story to understand any stories going forward in Magic. Any at all. So, that's my quick review in terms of, I'm not necessarily saying to read it or not to read it this time, but that's my quick review.
I thought the story was good. I don't want to say too much more in the quick review because I think there's a lot to talk about in the long version.
Okay.
But I think the story was good, but I do think you have a point in that it's maybe not pivotal.
It's definitely not pivotal.
But it's cool anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, if those quick reviews sound interesting, intriguing, whatever you might want to call it to you, and you have not gotten a chance to read this story for yourself, or if you just want a refresher, the top link in the description down below will take you to read this story for yourself. We try to remove as many barriers as possible. And so that link, just check the description. You can click on that link or tap that link, and you'll go right to the story itself. No need to go searching around for it, although it is just on the story tab on the website, but still. And yeah, of course, if you do leave to go do that, we would love it then if you would come back here and join us on our continued review. And we would love it if you would leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you agree with the points that we're about to make? Disagree? Is there something about this story that you liked or disliked that we did not talk about? That's what the comments down below are for. Keep the conversation going. Super important. But before we get on to the full review itself, hi, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. We hope you're enjoying all the things that we're doing on this and all of our channels at this Geek for All family of channels. We do have Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All. Links down in the description box below. If you missed it at the end of last month, Gluten Free for All had two new videos. That's right. So definitely go check that out for yourself. Like I said, link in the description for both Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All. And wherever you are, either of those channels or here, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you'll get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, or if you're on this channel, whenever we go live as well, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on this channel. Spoilers, I suppose. Please don't forget that pre-release Friday we will not be live because we will be at pre-release. And you can stay tuned to the channel and watch for our videos that will come out that night instead.
Right.
So, fair trade-off, I think. But still, Mondays, yeah, exactly. Mondays, if you're a fan of Magic, we play Magic the Gathering Arena every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And then on Fridays, we play whatever video game we happen to be playing at the time. This Friday, we will be playing a new game. So you are going to want to tune in for that. Great way to start off with the streams and keep in touch as we go through a whole game. But I encourage you to tune in this Friday for that new game, being purposefully mysterious about it. So definitely stay tuned. But enough of that. On to the full review itself. This story is the main stories, which I get it. I get why it's the main stories. So far, we haven't really gotten into any of the main characters being in the main story. They're all in the side stories so far. And obviously Teferi has been partially in the main story, but I mean like actually part of the story. And we really haven't gotten that yet. We've gotten like quick flashes of Teferi and or Kaya like present in the space. So I don't really count that yet. But it's the main story because it's about the Brothers War, and it's telling the story of the war and the aftermath of the war. So, the last two main stories that we did, episode 1 and episode 2, were set in 69 AR and forward from there to like 70 and 80 and whatever. This goes back now to 28 AR. And it's in the middle of the war, or at one point during the war. I don't want to say in the middle if, like, you know, technically, Joe, this was in the beginning. Fair. It was during the war at some point. But it is 41 years before the first two stories started. Very strange. Time travel is what time travel is, so I guess it makes sense. But we get to hear about Krug in Yosha. And you thought it was kind of interesting, not that I didn't, but you made it a point to say that you thought it was interesting that they talked about the fact that the streets were made so intricately, and kind of the whole city was made so intricately. The description they used in that one section was, it said the streets were made of spiraling star patterns. And the quote was, even the streets were art.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. And then they went on to say that, you know, everything was decor as well as utility.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a Victorian kind of ideal of, like, if it exists, it needs to be decorative as well as being useful in some kind of way.
Okay.
And, you know, I like old houses. So, you know, I love that kind of thing, and going into these old houses and seeing all these things that were meant to be useful, but that you want to just kind of keep in your house for the decorative element that they provide, despite them not necessarily being useful anymore, because a lot of time has passed.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get to this a little bit later, but there was a lot of mention, because this story is about a bunch of pilot cadets that, because of the war, have very rapidly been promoted to pilot. It's really kind of just, we need you, so congrats, you did it, right? It's not even necessarily that they earned it, although what Laura, who was their commanding officer, was basically saying to them was, you are the only people who could pilot these things while keeping your heads. So you're it, you 5. And they basically get gifted these 5 brand new mechs that were made by Urza/Tanos. And Tanos comes and gives them a pep talk, etc. of, you know, go off and you know, fight in the war, you'll do great. And Sanwell, not Samwell. I keep mixing up Samwise and Sanwell. I feel like they were, one inspired the other. But anyway, Sanwell is basically our main character for this story. And Sanwell keeps talking about the fact that they're full-fledged pilots now, and they're not cadets anymore. And so even internally, he keeps saying cadet, and then correcting himself and saying, no, pilot. And one of the quotes that you asked me to write down was, when he was kind of chastising himself for getting it wrong, he says, mentality. Change your mind, change reality. You're a pilot now.
Yeah. That's just a great thing to kind of remind yourself in any kind of capacity, you know, any kind of career, any kind of situation that you might find yourself in.
Yeah.
That might just be something you need to remind yourself in those moments, because in moments where you're stressed or you're unsure or whatever, you might start to feel like you don't belong there, even if you do. And even if you have earned the ability to be there,
Mm-hmm.
and have the skills necessary to be there. And that's something that I feel like particularly our generation has a lot of trouble with.
Fair enough. It reminds me of the camp where we used to work, which we talk about all the time. Amy and I worked there, and some of our closest friends whom we still converse with and communicate with and spend time with worked there as well. And it formulated a lot of my youth and my growth. And one of the things that we used to teach there was wilderness survival. And just surviving out in the woods, we would basically teach the kids how to properly spend the night in the woods, making a shelter, all these things. But I don't know if you remember, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, because if you don't, it's fine. Because I don't think you ever took the class, and I know you didn't teach it. But do you remember the first rule of wilderness survival?
I do not.
It is a positive mental attitude. Because if you're lost up here, you're lost out here as well.
Oh, well then.
And
now we know why I need this quote. Because holy crap.
But that's what I'm saying.
I'm lost up here before I'm lost out here.
So it says, change your mind, change reality, right?
And one usually follows the first one, so.
But that's what I thought of. Change your mind, change reality means, if in here you're like, oh my God, I'm going to die, I can't do this is insane, how am I going to live, what the hell? No. You need to use your brain to focus on living, surviving, making shelter, finding food, starting a fire, whatever the case may be. And so you need to make sure that you keep a positive mental attitude. Everything's okay. I'm still here. This'll all work out.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be capable of that if I was lost in the wilderness. I don't know. I think there would be days where I would be able to get there.
Yes.
But there would be days where it just wouldn't happen for me.
And honestly, human beings are very resilient, and animals, of which we are, whether people like hearing that or not, animals of which we are adaptive. And it is arguably adapt or die, right? That's just kind of how, in some cases, how it works, and especially in a wilderness survival situation. But regardless, you will likely surprise yourself as long as you can keep up that will to live. If you lay down to die, yeah, you're probably doomed. Congrats, you were right. But keep that positive mental attitude. Try, think, take a breath, and change your mind, change reality. So, a very good quote to focus in on. Then we had a long quote. This story was very much about war.
Yeah.
It was heavily focused on war and not focused on the romanticizing of war.
No.
Right? I'm very biased. I do not as much enjoy war video games I don't think we're ever going to be sponsored by them anytime soon, so I can say Call of Duty style games, not as much my bag. Maybe we'll try them one day on Video Games for All, so, don't call me a hypocrite if we do. It's still a genre of game that is extremely popular, and so it's something that I'm sure we will want to look into. But regardless, that style of game was never my thing, and kind of romanticizing shooting and killing and all that other stuff, for real world events like that, not really as much my bag. And this story didn't do that. I don't think there was a bit of romanticism of this war at any point.
I will say, though, the language was beautiful.
Well, yes, the writing and the
poetically written.
Yes, the writing and the symbolism, super well done. But to be fair, for the last
was very powerful.
Yes, for the last 2 stories and now this one. So for these 3 stories that we've read by Miguel Lopez, it seems like that will be the standard going forward, and I'm here for it because it's phenomenal, it's absolutely really amazing work. So we can talk about that. The language that was used was beautiful. It was brutal. It was descriptive. It was horrifying.
It was brilliant because it found a way to describe something that people have a hard time describing. When you experience something of that nature and people ask you about it, it's hard for you to kind of be able to put it into words quite right. You know, because it's something so monumental and it affects your soul. So I think I have like a slightly deeper respect for writers who have a way of being able to describe something like that. Because I feel like people who actually experienced it, and not to say that Miguel Lopez
I have no
didn't,
knowledge one way
because
or
I
another.
have no idea.
No knowledge.
But I feel like it's the kind of thing where someone who actually was in it and did it would have a hard time putting it into words or describing it that way, or letting people who didn't experience it understand. So I think I have like just an ounce more respect for a writer who can do that than a writer who, you know, is kind of a little bit more like the rest of us, I guess. You know, they're good at describing things, but things of that monumental nature, maybe they just can't get there quite the way this writer can.
It's a cool way to put it. I like that. And so I mentioned that we would come back to it. There was a lot of talk of cadets, no pilots. Like, Sandwell did it like multiple, countless times. Tanos did it at least once. Like, it happened a couple of times in the story. Then we get to discussion of what the world outside was like during this attack. There were explosions, there was screaming, there was panic, there was running and yelling and all this other stuff. Chaos, cacophony, etc. And Sandwell mentioned that it reminded him of celebration days, because there would be fireworks going off and cheering in the streets and people having a festival or some big happy moment of, you know, just again, a ton of people in the streets.
Jovial bells.
Yes, thank you. And many times it mentioned how this war reminded Sandwell, and just in general was, like a celebration day, but awful. Like, you still had the explosions of fireworks, but here it's not fireworks, it's bombs.
Right.
And killing and guns or whatever. You had cheering, but really it's screaming, fearing for your life, running for your life, screaming in fear and pain and terror. And you had the bells, like you mentioned, so thank you. The bells of happiness and, you know, celebration during the celebration days, and then bells of warning during the attack. That is awesome. That comparison is great, and we'll read a quote in a moment about that. But I would argue that both of those things, the calling them cadets instead of pilots and the celebration day, was a little repetitive for me. It came up multiple times in both respects. And I feel like each time it came up again, didn't really expand on how it came up previously. Because if it did, fine. Then it makes perfect sense for you to mention it again because you're adding on to it or changing it a little bit or this or that. I didn't feel like it did that as much. It was just like, oh, okay, they're talking about the celebration again and how this is like that but bad. And, oh, they did the pilot cadet thing for like the 5th time. Like, okay. Like, it was a little repetitive for me. And then I wanted to get to a point that you brought up, which is the medium that was used to tell this story.
Right. So for me, it wasn't repetitive because for me, when listening to this story, those moments where it was comparing the celebration days to the war, basically, it was a little bit muddy and hard for me to understand and like differentiate that it was just comparing the two. And I was like, wait, is it like an important day, but then, you know, like they went to go have a celebration and then there was an attack at the celebration? And he was like, no. You know, they're like comparing the two separate things. And I was like, okay, now it makes sense. But for me, it was like, sorry, ignore the plane. It's very loud.
Yeah,
wow.
It's fine.
But yeah, for me, like these certain things that they kept on bringing up, if this was a movie instead of a story, that would have felt a lot more natural, a lot more seamless. And because that's a trope in war movies that you see a lot, right? Is like, oh, you know, look at these kiddos, they're heading into war, I'm so proud of them, and then they all get decimated, right?
And that happy-go-lucky feeling, you sit there and you're like, oh shit, right.
So they don't have a lot of time because it's an army to describe to you the characterization of each of these characters, right? So their way of making you feel really distraught about losing them is to say, look, you know, they're, you know, fresh out of boot camp, you know, they're these kiddos and they're heading off to war, and then when they die, which inevitably happens in war, you didn't get to form an attachment with them because of characterization, so your attachment to them was thinking of them as if they were maybe younger than they were, or inexperienced because they were, you know, or whatever. So it's a little bit harder for you to deal with the fact that they passed away in war. So I think that's a common trope in movies, though. When it's taken on the text form of a short story, I can see how it would feel repetitive. So I was trying to like picture it in my head as though it was a movie. Like usually when you read a story, I'm picturing it in my head, like I'm just seeing sort of images, right?
Yep.
But for this one, I was watching a movie. I was seeing the scenes. I was seeing the camera panning a frame, you know, that kind of thing. And I think that that's how this story would shine if it had the opportunity to.
Yeah, and I thought similarly. I think I was a little bit more cynical about it than you were, because I think that's a very beautiful way of putting it. I more was thinking like, okay, there's like big mechs, right? Like they're piloting or like radio controlling these big mechs. And they're out there and they're killing things, and they're like, you get to hear about them like unfolding and like their exhaust ports and what they look like and stuff. To me, the draw of like big mech movies is to see the big mechs, right? Like, so this was a different way of doing it, but I feel like some of the prestige of it was lost because it was a short story as opposed to a movie. Is that Miguel's fault? Hell no. And I think for what it was, he did a phenomenal job describing it so that it could be pictured like a movie, right? It just, for me, it fell a little bit flat because they were trying to take a movie and turn it into a short story, and for me, it didn't as much work.
Right.
Like we said in the beginning.
Translation kind of lost a little bit.
As we said in the beginning, if you disagree, if you have a different viewpoint, as always, we want to hear from you in the comments down below. Give us a different perspective. Let us know why you disagree as well. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, something that you like to mention in these videos, it's I think it's been a while, but you like to say, show, don't tell, right?
Sure.
And I think this story, because of what it was trying to convey, had to tell you things instead of show you, because the way to show you would be visual.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the issue was with this, is that in order to show you instead of tell you, it would have to be with your eyes,
Yeah.
And so you could truly enjoy the mechs. You could, just see the expression on somebody's face. Or quickly hear somebody say, oh, no, they're not cadets anymore, they're pilots. Right? That's something that in a movie doesn't feel as repetitive when it's said that many times, because it's being said by the person who's experiencing it at the time, as opposed to an author writing it down, and then you're sitting there reading it and going, ugh, this again? It's when you're seeing a character say it a couple times, or a couple different characters saying it, it doesn't feel like, well, this is now the 5th time it's been said.
Right.
Yeah.
It even, you talk about, like, an amazing moment that I'm sure would have been amazing visually, but was still amazing in text form, was the Dragon Engine killing, like, kind of breaking apart that barricade, but in the process, killing Laura, Lieutenant Marcos, who they had just met, and the pilots of Swords 4 and 5. Like, that was brutal, and it was like, there was like a red mist that like flew by the area, and it's like, yeah, that's their liquefied bodies and blood just like raining down on you, and you're breathing it in now, and like...
Gross.
Yeah, amazing though. But like, that part was super well done. And like, yes, I would have loved to have seen it, but even having not seen it, damn good. So there was another quote that you wanted me to write down, and this is a bigger one, but still important. His in this is all from Sanwell's perspective. So, never in his young life had Sanwell lived in a place where the gods were so close. And never did he imagine himself becoming someone who loved that proximity. Do you want to stop there or keep going?
Yeah. Stop there. So that piece I wanted to write down because that piece made me think a lot about sort of the difference between growing up religious and kind of coming into your own spirituality as an adult.
Right, getting the choices to whether to continue that journey the way that you were raised to, or finding it for yourself, you mean?
Yeah. Well, I think everyone finds it for themselves in their own way, regardless of what level they continue doing it the way they were raised.
Sure.
Because you're a different person now. So things mean different things to you and affect you differently, and just factor into your life in different ways. So I thought that one was cool just for that. It made me think about people's personal experiences with, being raised in a religion and then kind of coming to a point where they understand fully their own beliefs, just from a spirituality standpoint as an adult. Yeah.
And the reason I asked if we should stop there is because technically the next line we also wrote down, but there was a paragraph break there. So in the next paragraph, because it, you'll see, but contrasts with that statement partially, it said, but today, in the blood-slick red brick streets, the gods felt quite distant.
Yeah.
This, you want me to keep going or something? This day was a dark mirror to those celebration days. And each block the pilots advanced plunged them deeper into that horrible mirror. The ringing bells today were the same bells that tolled on celebration days, only now they screamed.
Yeah.
So like I said, another, like, this is a different way of talking about the Celebration Day versus the War Day. But like Amy said, and like hopefully it came across that I feel this way also. What writing? I mean, come on, like, it's so good.
Amazing war imagery that has a way of helping you be in it and feel it and understand it as somebody who is fighting it, as opposed to somebody who is just watching it from the outside, which I think is really important when it comes to war writing.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, wow.
It's just amazing. It's just so good. I think the writing for these stories, like, I think Miguel has done an incredible job for all three of them so far that we've gotten a chance to read. I said after the first one that I was really looking forward to these sets of stories, even though I said that I'm like kind of iffy on this one. Again, that's not because of the writing at all, obviously. It's because I didn't feel like there was a lot of content here as much. Like, the words were amazing, the descriptions were brilliant. I just feel like when I walked away from this one, I was like, okay, what do I take away from this for the future stories? And the answer is nothing. It wasn't about that for this particular story, despite the fact that it's the main story, episode 3 of 5. So we only get 5 of these, and we still have no indication of where this is going in any capacity. So, like, I think that aspect of it kind of frustrated me a bit.
Yeah, because I mean, it wasn't about what you could take away from it for the story going forward. It was what you could take away from it as a person.
Yes, in life, absolutely. And it was, again, phenomenally well written, like a great story that either needed to be told or somebody very much wanted to tell, and I enjoyed reading it. In the context of Magic Story, it wasn't exactly what I wanted, because there weren't long-reaching implications in any capacity, but as a person who enjoys reading and like reading good material, then I got what I came for.
Well, I would argue that it had a kernel of that. And I think the kernel of that it had was that it kind of went on to tell you that it essentially destroyed a location and or possibly a location's culture. And I think that has very long-term consequences on that location.
Okay.
So if that's a location that we're going to see again, I think even if it's decades and decades out from that period of time, I think it provides some understanding of the lack of culture or the generational loss felt by the people those decades and decades further forward.
Sure. Well, and not for nothing, we read in those first 2 stories, right, in 69, 70, 80, 85 AR, that this area ends up becoming run by warlords. And again, I'm sure warlords aren't meticulously placing bricks in the street in spiraling star patterns.
No.
So, yeah, from that perspective, you're right. That we know what it becomes. It becomes a warlord-run area that even Kayla, when she kind of goes back to it, is like a little worried about returning to her home because of it. So...
Right, and how am I going to be treated as a person who is this or that or the other thing, and what's it going to be like when I get there?
Yeah. You know, we didn't even really talk about it because, I mean, it happens in... It's... Well, actually, let's talk about the crap aspects of war that this story covers. Because when Sanwell's story is done, and we cut to the next section of the story, which is basically just... And I say just, give me a moment. But is basically just the section that Teferi shows up in, and so we need to hear how and why Teferi shows up and knows, oh, we're too early, it doesn't happen here, you know, try again or whatever. That section as well as parts of Sanwell's section, truly are just, hey, by the way, war blows. Like, can we all agree that war blows? Here's the story where we're telling you war blows,
Right.
if you were unaware. Because we have...
We tell you some of the degrees to which it blows and the specificity of the things that it affects.
Yeah. So Carlo is the pilot of Sword 3, who is with Sanwell and Rika, who's the pilot of Sword 2, Sanwell, the pilot of the name of the story, Sword 1. We hear from Sanwell and Carlo throughout this story that they are worried about their siblings, individually, who are out there somewhere in the war, and they're trying to find out about where those people are, how they have fared, etc. Carlo finds out that the area where he used to live and where his sibling is, or his family is located, has been taken by the Falaji, the opposing side of the war. And kind of asks, like, did we just give up on that area? Like, are we going to take it back? You know, and Tanos is like, well, we're going to do what we can. You know, we got to fight them and distract them and whatever, and we got to get the refugees out and stuff like that. So, you know, we're trying to do the evacuation here. So Carlo is, I don't want to say shell-shocked, because there's a meaning for that, and that's not what this is yet. But he is stunned by this information because that's his relatives, and he doesn't know if they're okay, but you know that those things are going through his head, those bad thoughts. Because in his mind, what else could it be?
Right. Well, not just, well, what else could it be, and or just... when it's a severe bad thing, the possibility of it being more than just a little bit is enough for you to have to factor it in.
Yeah. And then, unfortunately for Carlo, gets to the point where, as I mentioned, the Dragon Engine kind of breaks down that barricade that they being Sanwell, Rika, and Carlo all were there previously. Laura, their commanding officer, sends them around, like, hey, go around that way and flank or whatever. And as they leave, boom, that barricade is destroyed, and everyone who was there is now dead. Everyone. And there's that red mist. Sanwell and Rika, appropriately, are a little upset by that, right? And are traumatized by it, but Carlo is not able to shake that. And Carlo begins to yell. And yell. And yell. And Sanwell and Rika, who were able to gather themselves, are aware of the fact that these guys are going to hear us. Like, they're still here. They just blew away that area, but they're not deaf. Like, we need to get out of here so that we can regroup and figure out what the hell we're going to do. But with Carlo screaming, they're not going to be able to do anything because they're just going to get caught and murdered. So they have to now take Carlo with them. Spoilers, I guess. Carlo is completely ineffectual for the rest of the story. He's unable to do anything at all.
Because he's traumatized.
Exactly. Yeah, so please don't misunderstand. I'm not upset with him, right? I'm just stating facts. When the fight starts, when the Falaji army shows up in front of Swords 1 and 2, and 3, arguably, because Carlo is there, Carlo, when they use their little, hand rod gun things to, point at the things that they want their swords to attack, Carlo squeezes the trigger, because it's what he was trained to do, but it was pointed at the ground, because he's not actually there. Yeah. And it gets to the point where Sword 3 is swarmed, knocked over, destroyed, Carlo is beaten, shot, burned, whatever, and then when he finally comes to enough to say words, it's after he's been blown to hell and is crawling towards Sanwell and Rika and looking for them, because it's dusty or cloudy or whatever, smoky, ashy in that area, and is yelling out for them. And because he is again causing a ruckus, and Sanwell and Rika are far enough away that they can't quiet him, he gets shot with a bunch of arrows and bolts and stuff and dies right then and there. And Yeah. And Sanwell and Rika are able to get away. Barely. And Sword 2 is completely destroyed. Sword 1 is mostly destroyed, but still able to fight on with its last directive of kill.
Right.
That's it. That was the last directive it was given. That's what it does. It kills. And Sanwell hears that that is occurring, despite knowing that Sword 1 was heavily damaged as well. And, like I said, then they run off. Then we hear about Eamon. And that's where we cut away from Sanwell and Rika and hear about a brand new character. Again, like I said, the section is mainly just for the Teferi aspect of things, but how well done was this section?
Yeah.
And when I say well done, I mean devastating. Like, reading this section was devastating. And from my read of it, I could be wrong, but I believe that Eamon was a Falaji warrior. And a gravely injured Falaji warrior at that. Kind of comes to, on the ground, surrounded by dead bodies. Talks about basically having been attacked and injured by Sword 1, I believe. Or at least one of the swords. And we hear about the horrors of war more. So, again, we heard about it a bit with Carlo. This is where it really gets into it. And it's for me personally, right? Other people may have different situations and experiences, and that's what makes these stories great, is that different people can react to it in different ways. I did not think that this was too much to read, for me. I in no way fault a single person who would say that it was too much, at all. For me, I didn't think it was. I thought it was done well. I thought it was brutal and it was devastating, but I thought it was manageably so from a reader's perspective. But again, knock on wood, I have been very fortunate in my life, and I acknowledge that privilege, that I have not had to deal with those types of things in my life, and I would like to think that I'm very grateful for that. So, but yeah, that aspect of the story, while tough, I did not think went too far.
That's another thing that I think would have been more effective if it had been a movie. Because
Yeah.
I think you would have been more emotionally affected by this entire story if it had been a movie and a visual medium where you could really feel like you were there and in it and doing it and feeling the things.
So,
you know, but it's a little bit hard to feel those emotions quite as deeply when it's just being described as words.
well, I was going to say, I don't know, have you ever seen Saving Private Ryan?
Mm-hmm.
And the famous scenes of Saving Private Ryan? Like, that's what I think of with this, where it's like hazy and then it kind of goes from blurry to like fade in, and it's just horror all around you. Just like mutilation, death, screaming, pleading, begging. And that's what we get descriptions of here by Eamon, or in Eamon's story. My favorite, and again, it sounds weird to say favorite, but the I think most impactful for me section from Eamon's portion of the story was where he talks about, because you focused on this a lot as well, there was a person, like when Eamon kind of comes to and starts to move around, there was someone near him like clawing at him, asking for help. And Eamon described it as, there was a dead man next to him asking him for help. And your point was like, dead man? And I was like, again, he may not be clinically dead,
Right.
but if he's laying there and that's the assessment that Eamon made, it means this person is way far gone. And, you know, and then the next line he uses later as he's moving away is, moved away from the pleading corpse.
Yeah.
Brutal. Super brutal. But again, so good. Like, how amazing is that? And again, I mean the writing, not the situation. Please don't misunderstand me. But
yeah, to me, I heard that and I thought of like when you're trying to save someone from drowning and they're like pushing you under the water and stuff.
sure,
Because they're trying to save themselves.
sure, they're panicking. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
It made me think of that. And it made me feel like when he pushed away from him, it made me feel like he just swam away from the drowning person.
Sure.
Like, oh, you tried to push me under? Well, I'm not saving you now.
Okay, hold on. Let me reframe that a little bit. I've done some lifeguard training. If you don't have the proper tools as a lifeguard or as someone, even if not a lifeguard, but as someone trying to save someone who's drowning, you are actually taught that if the person is panicking to such a degree that they are pushing you under, you do swim away from them. If you don't have the proper tools to help them and they're threatening your life, even if it's not purposeful, right? It is because they are panicking. It doesn't matter. You're there to try to save them, but not at the risk of your own life in the process. So, yes, in certain instances, right? I'm not saying across the board. In certain instances, in water life-saving training, you're told that if a person is flailing in that way and trying to push you under, there are ways to get out of those grabs, and then you swim away from them. And if you don't have the proper equipment, you can't go back in to continue to try to save them. And that's devastating, but you're putting your life at risk doing it, and if it's not possible, you would stop.
I don't think it's not possible, but that's me.
It depends on the situation, right?
Yeah.
And I would not fault anybody for making that decision of like, oh my God, they just tried to kill me. Again, they didn't try to kill you. They almost killed you. That was the effect of what they were doing, but that's not what they were trying to accomplish. But still.
So you move away from them, speak to them, and then move back to them.
Again.
That's what I would do.
Sure. It's a person who's panicking. You're not necessarily going to be able to have a calm conversation with someone who's fighting for their life, right? And again, anybody who tries anything appropriate, I completely understand. I'm telling you what the training was in that instance. Like, usually lifeguards have items, the tubes, the life-saving ring, etc., that they would use, and they would throw that to the person. So the person can get on that and use that as the flotation device, as opposed to your body and pushing you under the water to get them above. That's all. And then the story ends with Eamon seeing Teferi, but it's ghostly blue Teferi going around and checking on people in the alley, and then saying to Kaya, as we know it's going to be to Kaya, right? The story doesn't tell us that because we're seeing it from Eamon's perspective, but Teferi says, not yet. We're too early. And because Eamon sees Teferi as a ghost and mentally says, that's death. Death is coming for me. I'm dying. I know I'm dying. And death is coming for me. But then he hears from death, not yet. We're here too early. And even literally says, we've got a few decades more still to wait. Or a decade or whatever. And then the end of the story is Eamon leaving the hospital and saying, you know what? I heard what death said. Not yet.
Right.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah, because Teferi was obviously not talking to him. But he felt like it was.
Yep. Well, and again, in his half-dead haze, that is what he heard. That is what he saw. But you know what? Whatever it takes, man. Like I said, people adapt, right? Eamon got to where he wanted to be by listening to the ghost, listening to death, and knowing not yet, and living further into his life because of it.
Yeah, so it goes back to that saying before, even though they didn't repeat it. So there you go, Joe. They didn't repeat something, even though it ties back into it. You know, what was it there?
What? Change your mind, change reality?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much. It was, again...
He was able to survive because he thought death itself was telling him that he was supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So his body was able to change as a result of his mind making that choice, which he didn't realize was a choice.
Nope.
You know, he thought it was just reality already, right?
Yeah. And how did he survive? With a positive mental attitude.
Right.
I mean, I don't know of a better way to end the story and the review than that. Really great stuff. Loved it. Again, like I said, feeling like it should have been a movie, and there was a bit of repetition, and the fact that in the grand scheme of Magic Story, it wasn't where I wanted it to be, doesn't mean I can't enjoy it and say that I enjoyed it and talk about aspects of it that I enjoyed. But that's why I said I was mixed on it, right? Because there were moments where I was like, ugh, this again, and like I felt like I had to push through it a bit. But I'm glad I did, because to get to the end that we got to was great. So, like we always say, we want to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Let us know. Are you done with this? I'm good, right? Okay. So, obviously, thank you all very much for watching. We hope that you all enjoyed.
Yes.
In addition to leaving your thoughts down below, like I said at the top, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, including more JaARs in the weeks to come.
Yes, check out those gluten-free for all videos, because again, there were 2 for October, and there's going to be 1 for November as well.
Link in the description down below. Like I said, 3 new videos a week over on Video Games for All as well. So go to any of those channels, sub, ring the bells, blah, blah, blah. All that fun YouTube stuff. Being able to read a story, talk about the parts that you disliked, but then talk about the parts that you loved, especially when it comes to Magic Story, relating it to Magic as a whole, or just being able to look at it as a one-off, I think is a great way for all of you to join us as we show off our...
#Vorthos Pride.
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. We will hopefully see you on Monday. We're going to do our best to get the videos out as quickly as we can. The stories came out all at once, as they have been doing recently. We're doing the best we can. Thank you for your patience. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.